This part of the training discusses the section on administering the test, and that's on pages 54 through 61 of the online administration manual. Now, from previous trainings, we've already discussed parts of this section. So let me remind you which part of this section that we've already discussed. So in previous trainings on page 56, we've already discussed how to retrieve seal codes. We've discussed how to provide seal codes to examinees. On page 57, we discussed how to unlock and lock a test session. We saw how to view examinee progress in a test session. And on page 58, we saw in PA Next the key to the testing status. We looked at ready, active. We saw some examples where it indicated exited. We looked at resumed. We discussed completed, and we discussed marked complete. We discussed what it means to resume an interrupted test. We discussed what it means to exit testing for a multiple day sitting. We discussed what it means to direct examinees to log out of TestNav. We discussed what it means to resume testing for multiple day sitting. On page 60, we discussed what it means to stop a test session. On page 60, we also discussed what it means to mark an examinee's test complete. And then finally, after all testing is done, you have to confirm test session status. So number one, verify that test sessions continuing another sitting, such as testing over multiple days, are locked. Number two, verify that completed test sessions, all examinees have a status of completed, or marked completed, or stopped. So we know what it means to lock test sessions, and we also know what it means to stop a test session. So we're going to look at certain parts of the administration manual in terms of administering the test. So as a room supervisor, you need to make sure you understand this section, administering the test, very carefully. So the first part talks about cell phones and electronic devices. Examinees may not use cell phones, smartwatches, fitness bands, media players, or any other electronic devices at any time, including during the break. All devices must be powered off and stored out of sight. So during the break, if this is, let's say, standard time test between test 2 and 3, the proctors and any other staff that's outside needs to be checking to make sure that no electronic devices are being used. If they are, that is prohibited behavior, and the student is not allowed to continue testing. If an examinee accesses a device at any time, or if a device activates after being stored away, the examinee must be dismissed. Staff should diligently monitor for prohibited behavior during testing and during the break. Strongly enforce the dismissal of any examinee who engages in prohibited behavior. Prominently displace the prohibited device posters at central locations. Now, before I go to the note, remember the ACT states that districts may have a stricter policy, and if it is a stricter policy than what ACT has, then we must abide, our students must abide by the stricter policy. So in our district for testing requires that all cell phones be collected before students enter the room. So it is very important you tell students that they need to put their cell phones in their locker if they have a locker, or leave their cell phones in the car, or leave them at home. If they can't do any of that, then the room supervisor needs to collect them, put them in a Ziploc bag, and store them in the front office. It's not a very good idea to put those cell phones in the room just in case one of them is not turned off or is not on silent, and and it goes off. All right, so that's a disruption. So make sure it's more encourageable to make sure that the students leave their cell phones at home, or in their car if they drove, or in a locker if they have a locker. All right. If they don't, then the room supervisor must collect them and put them in the front office. And then after testing, the students will retrieve them. So ACT policy says this, and I'm not going to read it because we do not abide by this. We have a stricter policy. Okay, so let's look at that next one, though. It says this: staff should not use cell phones or electronic devices while in the test room. If staff members have a cell phone in the room, they should be turned off or silent. So again, EBR policy states that staff members should not have a cell phone on them when they are in the vicinity of a room that has testing going on. All right, calculators. All right, so let's talk about calculators. The ACT calculator policy is designed to ensure fairness for all examinees, avoid disturbances in the test room, and protect the security of test materials. A permitted calculator may be used only on the mathematics test. All problems on this test can be solved without a calculator. The calculator must be turned off and put away during all other tests. Handheld calculators may not be connected in any way to a computer or device being used for testing. Talking calculators must be authorized in advance by ACT. Examinees with talking calculators must test one-to-one. A current calculator policy was provided in your materials shipment. Each room supervisor must be given a copy of this policy, posted for examinees to see at check-in stations, test rooms, etc. It may be read to examinees as a general announcement before testing begins. So let me show you what the calculator policy looks like. We're not going to actually go over it, but this is what you would get. So the test coordinator has access to this and should have sent you a copy of it, but it's been updated, and that's a current one. That's a current one that's on the district, in the state website. It's been updated August 5th, 2019. So these are the responsibility of the student to make sure that they know which calculator to use. It's also a good idea, and many of the schools do this, to provide the students with a calculator, so there's no issue in terms of calculator policy. But this is a calculator policy, so it talks about what testing staff is responsible for. So notice testing staff, that's the room supervisor, that is the test coordinator, that is the proctor, and so on. Testing staff is responsible for, let me go ahead and expand this. Notice testing staff is responsible for monitoring during the test to ensure examinees are using only permitted calculators, dismissing any examinees found to be using a prohibited calculator during testing. The following calculators are prohibited, so they talk about which calculators are prohibited in terms of Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, Casio, handheld tablet or laptop computers are prohibited. Electronic writing pads or pen input devices are prohibited. Calculators built into cell phones or any other electronic communication devices are prohibited. Calculators with QWERTY format letter keys are prohibited. Let's see, and then there's a section on the following types of calculators are permitted, but only after they are modified as noted. And then the next one says, in a computer-based testing environment, an on-screen calculator may be available. Test coordinators can check the administration instructions for details. Calculators may not be connected in any way to the computer or device being used for testing. So we're doing online, right? So this is what it says. An on-screen calculator may be available. So I want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go to let's see. I'm going to go to TestNav just to show you. Okay, so I'm on the math test in TestNav, and so when I get to the math test, I'm going to just go to a few questions. All right, so I'm on this problem, and here's where the calculator is for the student. So the calculator is right here. The problem's this. This is a Desmos graphing calculator. So unless, let me open it up, unless a student have had experience using Desmos graphing calculator, they're going to struggle with this. So students should be using the calculator they are most familiar with using during the school year. So this may not be a calculator they were using. So it's a good idea. It's a good idea to provide students with the calculator that they have been using. Now remember, ACT says that a calculator is not really needed, but provide students with a calculator, especially if that's part of their IEP. But this is the online calculator, so if they don't have access to a calculator, then this is the one they would see on the online test. It is the Desmos graphing calculator, and chances are they may not have or may not know how to use this type of calculator. All right, so just a word of caution here in terms of the calculator they will see online on the online test. All right, and so that is the calculator policy, so the ACT calculator policy. All right, and now we're still in the sections on page 54. These are examinees' responsibilities. Bring and use a permitted calculator, and they give them the URL to go to for the current ACT policy, calculator policy. It says, note an approved calculator is available in TestNav. Remember, that's one we just saw. That's a Desmos calculator. Students may not be familiar with that, so always provide them with a so the school is not responsible, but it's a good idea to give students the calculator that they've been using in the classroom. Staff responsibilities. So staff responsibilities. Check for prohibited calculators during the test. And remember, we're talking about math here. Check periodically to make sure examinees did not switch calculators after the first check. If an examinee uses a prohibited calculator, dismiss the examinee for prohibited behavior. If a calculator has characters 1 inch or high or larger, or a raised display, seat the examinee where no others can see the display. On page 55, they talk about other items. Examinee may not bring any of the following into the test room unless part of an authorized accommodation or support: textbooks, foreign language or other dictionaries, scratch paper, notes, or other aids, highlighter pens, colored pens or pencils, correction fluid tape, reading material, tobacco in any form. Examinee and staff may bring snacks and beverages into the test room, but may only consume them outside of the room during break. Examinee timepieces. Examinees may have a personal timepiece such as a watch, timer, or stopwatch, provided it is on the desk. So if they have a watch, they cannot have it on their wrist. It must be on the desk. Not a distraction to others and not a prohibited device such as smartwatches or fitness bands. Okay, so make sure that if the examinee has one of those regular watches that's not a smartwatch, not a fitness band, that they must put it on the desk. They cannot wear it. All right, general announcements to examinees. Before testing begins, you may make announcements regarding cell phones and electronic devices. So remember, our district has a more restrictive policy on cell phones and restrictive devices. All right, so make sure you are using our policy. Next one is calculators. Read the examinees the current list of prohibited calculators and calculators permitted with modification from a calculator policy. Now remember, it says you may. It doesn't say you have to say this, okay? It says you may make announcements regarding hats. Some hats may obstruct your view of examinees' eyes and may allow examinees to conceal prohibited behavior, such as using a cell phone, earpiece, or other electronic device. Not all hats may hinder your ability to monitor examinees, and some examinees may wear hats or other head coverings due to religious convictions or medical reasons. The announcement to remove hats is left to your discretion. Institutional requirements. You may dismiss an examinee who purposely disregards a posted regulation of your site or school policy. Some schools, for example, do not allow smoking on school grounds. Explain to examinee the reason for the dismissal and document in full on the irregularity report. Nervous noise. Some examinees relieve tension through talk and movement before and after tests. Because they must maintain complete silence during testing, allow this normal behavior, but remind them to be considerate of other rooms that may still be testing while your room is taking a break. Restroom. Describe the location of restrooms and drinking fountains available during the break. Monitoring the test room. This is on page 55. Follow these policies for monitoring a test room. A member of the testing staff must be physically present in the room at all times to monitor the examinee or examinees. Monitoring through glass partitions or via security cameras is not allowed. The examinee or examinees cannot be left unattended even briefly. The room supervisor must remain in the room for the entire session, except when relieved by a proctor for a short break. One room supervisor cannot supervise multiple rooms at the same time. Note, a room supervisor is the person responsible for administering the test in one test room. A test coordinator who supervises a test room is the room supervisor for that room. On top of page 56, checking for prohibited behavior. Follow these guidelines to check for prohibited behavior. Throughout testing, move quietly around the room to discourage and detect prohibited behavior. Staff attentiveness is a very effective deterrent. Document all prohibited behavior and any actions taken on the irregularity report. If you suspect an examinee but are uncertain, warn the examinee of the behavior and ask ACT for a decision before the examinee is dismissed. If the behavior continues after one warning, promptly dismiss the examinee. If you dismiss an examinee for prohibited behavior, follow the instructions exactly. So make sure you go to the section that says dismiss for prohibited behavior. Then there's a little part on answering questions. You may answer examinees' questions about the mechanics of the test, but must not answer questions about guessing or content. Always refer examinees to the directions in their test. Do not comment on or add in any way to the test directions. Allowing examinees to leave the test room. Examinees may go to the restroom during testing, but it is best not to announce it. Secure examinees' test materials anytime they leave. Now, remember, in this case, such as the authorization tickets, their scratch paper, and so on. Secure examinees' test materials anytime they leave. Always be sure the examinee returns after leaving. If you have doubts, recheck identification. Unless authorized by ACT for breaks as needed, examinees who leave the test room during a timed test or return after timing has begun may not make up lost time. Only one examinee may leave the test room at any time. If two or more examinees need to leave at the same time, or if other rooms have been dismissed, the examinees must be accompanied by a proctor. Do not leave a test room unsupervised at any time. I want to emphasize this statement right here. Examinees who leave the test room during a timed test or return after timing has begun may not make up lost time. So when you get to the irregularities section, you will notice that in part of one of those irregularity sections, it mentions that the room supervisor must keep track of the number of minutes the student has lost and must report that on an irregularity report. All right, so again, unless authorized by ACT for breaks as needed, examinees who leave the test room during a timed test or return after timing has begun may not make up lost time. All right, so that's going to conclude the section on administering the test.